right, it's market regulator UK Sinha who's really given a huge shot in the arm as far as startups are concerned to stand out there and make a difference. I also have a very special guest joining us on this panel, Anupam Mittal. Thanks very much for being with us. We were discussing how does life change for startups. You've been one yourself. Are they going to breathe much more easy? The panel here believes there will not be a flurry of IPOs we'll see, but yes, there's an enabling environment of sorts there. Which side of the debate are you on?
Well, I think it's a very interesting topic. I think SEBI is certainly sending the right signals and making the right noises. However, in my view, IPOs are driven primarily by liquidity and institutional investors. So I'm not sure that simply by having another institutional platform for trading for startup stocks, you'll suddenly see a flurry of IPOs. Firstly, I think, we already have a question of liquidity on our current exchanges. Sure that having another platform really works. I would have liked to see more along the lines of what we saw in the US with the Jobs Act, where it just became less cumbersome for startups to IPO on the existing exchanges which already have liquidity. So look, I think it's going to take a lot more than simply make it easier for startup companies to list on a separate trading platform. I think liquidity issues need to be addressed, and I'm not sure we see that. So I still want to read the fine print.
You're not somebody who believes this is going to make a big difference to the lives of startups, but I'm going to take this discussion back to Mr. Prithvi here, who's been with us as well. Anupam here has been, he's done a startup, and he believes IPO or an easy IPO or another trading platform is really not the issue. The issue is liquidity, and institutional buyers are going to come in if there is enough of that. Do you concur on it? And do you believe that it's an exercise in futility that SEBI has done?
No, it's not. I mentioned earlier that we are not going to see a flurry, but at the same time, I would not say that this is a futility exercise in futility. I think you may be aware that SEBI started about a year ago something called an institutional trading platform, where no capital raising was allowed, but in case a company had institutional investors and that company could list on this ITP, and the trading was allowed amongst institutional investors, or there was a cap on the market lot. So that was a trading platform. Now we have gone one step further, and we are saying that companies can also raise capital, just not trade between two current investors or one current investor and one potential investor. So the new platform basically allows now a company which is mature to some extent, because only then there will be an interest in the institutional investors and NIIs to look at that company in terms of investment. These are not pure startups. These are companies which have already demonstrated a reasonable amount of traction in the market. And yes, liquidity is going to be an issue, because there are not going to be millions of investors participating in these issues either at the IPO stage or at the trading stage, because of the investment size and the ticket size of trading. So liquidity will be a concern, but there is a graduation available. What SEBI is also probably, I did not hear Mr. Sinha, but I think the concept paper talked of graduation from this platform to the main board after a year. So once the company has gone through the public route, has got institutional investors, has got high net worth investors, there have been proper disclosures for a year, then the company would migrate to the main platform, and then retail investors can come into it, and then it becomes a normal stock like any other stock. So this is basically a step in that direction of getting them listed on the main board, with conditions which have been relaxed for the institutional investors, which allows discretion for allotment, which removes lock-in or substantially reduces the lock-in, which does not obligate promoters. So there are a lot of concessions there, and I think we should see this basically as a yet another platform which will allow certain kinds of companies to come, list, and then graduate onto the main board.
Mr. Haldia, you'll have to hold your thoughts there, because I want to take this forward to Mr. S. Ramesh and to Anupam and to Vijay as well. Mr. S. Ramesh, the freedom in disclosure that has been granted, and this is not just pre-IPO but also post, because he answered that question specifically, that this freedom in disclosure pertains to even post-IPO life of these startups. How much of a breather that is, according to you?
See, instead of answering that question in isolation, I probably look at a few sets of things as a package. So one is, if you look at the profile of startups and the companies that are covered under this, One of the issues that we have been seeing for many companies in recent past is the level of, the promoter shareholding prior to the IPO and the private equity or the institutional holding. So to that extent, this platform, when they go on the main exchange, the norms are different. So when they go on this platform, I think that's bound to be diluted. The second and the more important we heard on the TV today was about use of proceeds. I think for many of these companies, a diluted or a simple skeleton use of proceeds will be very facilitative. Third, I also want to make another point before answering your question, that in recent rounds of private financing of some of these companies, we did see hedge funds and other kind of investors who typically also participate in capital offerings come into these private placements. So for them, if they get a platform where there is also a listing, my intuitive feeling is over time this will be beneficial. And therefore, from that perspective, if you look at these as well as the point you alluded to, that there are going to be dilutive norms of disclosure now and a little later, I think it just allows these companies to mature and get acclimatized to remaining listed. So it just helps them to sort of gain confidence on the listed space, and over time they will become far more proficient in dealing with this. So if you look at it as a package, I look at this as some kind of a journey than a destination. So it's a step in the right direction.
A step in the right direction as far as the journey of a startup is concerned, and we can vouch for the fact that startups are a difficult place to be in. But Anupam Mittal, you've been there, you've had your skin in the game. The whole recategorization of the promoter category that SEBI spoke about, that Mr. Sinha did expound upon, what is SEBI really looking and aiming to achieve out of that? Have they given plenty of room to startups where, the nature of the community is such that it can get completely professionalized, and the nature of the community is such that there may be some promoters who may get completely disinterested, like he pointed out. The whole recategorization of the promoter category, how important is that for startups like yourselves?
Yeah, so I think, as I was saying earlier, to me, I think these are sort of the right signals. I have not yet read the fine print, since this is something that has just sort of come, the press conference has just sort of finished. But to me, these are the right signals. I think SEBI is sending the right messages. I think recapitalizing the promoter equity or ensuring that disclosure norms are limited are all steps in the right direction. However, for me, I personally believe that, look, when you look around today, as far as good companies are concerned and the startups that are doing really well, capital really has not been a major problem for the good companies to raise. And if SEBI is trying to solve the capital raising problem per se with these sort of new norms, I suspect that we will see very limited success. I think most companies, or most of the good well-performing companies, as we've seen in the last few years with the hedge funds and VCs and PEs coming in, funding has really not been that big a challenge as long as you are performing. So to me personally, as a startup, I would like to see a lot more, given that the Corporate Affairs Ministry is now under the FinMin as well. I think it's very important that these 2-3 sort of organizations are pulling in the same directions, whether it's SEBI, whether it's corporate affairs, or whether it's the IT department. And I think those three need to sing the same song for us to start really feeling comfortable and ensuring that the startups that are being born in India are creating value as well as jobs in India and not starting to list overseas. So I think for me, those are some of the broader strokes that I'd like to see. But certainly it's a good start by SEBI, and I think, as I said continually earlier as well, I think they're sending the right signals.
Mr. Manish Dugar, CFO of Inbo, he joins us all the way from Bangalore. Thanks very much, Manish, for being with us. This is really targeted and is meant to be a shot in the arm for communities like yourselves. Is this going to arrest the flight of capital, and which is what it's really aimed at? Help create more jobs in India, help keep the money back in India, help the listings in India, the whole institutional trading platform, easier disclosure norms, recapitalization of promoters. Are you going to be looking at an India listing if you were a startup than a listing overseas post these IPO norms?
Thanks, Supriya. Let me first state that I am representing iSpirit at the part of the expert group, and I'll probably limit my comments on from an InnoBeep CFO point of view. Having said that, a lot of what you just mentioned are, and like Mr. Mittal said, are steps in the right direction. I personally, am seeing so much of proactiveness from, starting from Mr. UK Sinha visiting Bangalore and getting his team to meet up with us. These are things, as you understand, the ecosystem consists of a few things. It's not just the listing norms. It's also to do with monetary policies. It's to do with what the Corporate Affairs Ministry and the FinMin does. And I am seeing all of them making a concerted effort to kind of move in the right direction. Like we mentioned earlier, and like Naveen and myself went on record to say that if we get to a point where we get the same kind of status that we get in others geographies, there is no reason why we being from India would probably go anywhere outside to raise capital. And this, from my point of view, is probably a first step, a big step in the right direction.
All right. So if you were to list, you would list in India and you wouldn't go overseas. Prithvi, I want you to comment on that and answer that very quickly, because you have a startup here that is perhaps going to look at a listing very soon, and Naveen Tiwari has of course spoken about this, and now we've got Mesh also to talk about that. This is a thumbs up that's really coming in from the startup community. If they were to list, they would list here in India. Is that what SEBI had really set out to do? And also, this is for the first time you're seeing a concerted effort. The budget spoke about startups. The finance minister has been speaking about it. He spoke about it even in his overseas trips when he talks about the whole entrepreneur instinct in India. And now you have SEBI that has come up with enabling guidelines as far as listing is concerned. For the first time, you're actually seeing all ends meet, so to say, for the startup community. Will you agree with me, Mr. Haldia?
Yes, I will agree with you. The startups or these technology-driven companies, as I would rather like to call them, are not just ideas. I mean, they are realities of big kind. Flipkart is not an idea. It's a large company, and the kind of investment that it has drawn from international investors, and it's growing by the day. I mean, so there are, of course, that's just one example. So this is a recognition that India has, either is providing the back end or the outsourcing, or is actually creating a lot of value through IT within India through products and services. And if you recognize that fact well, then as was mentioned by the person from iSpirit, I mean, the entire ecosystem has to then recognize this reality and work in a direction that these companies are able to grow and become global in nature at some point of time. I mean, they have the potential of becoming an Alibaba or an Amazon. So I think the government is thinking that in the right direction, and the capital market regulator in a sense is fitting into this entire wheel, where they would like to ensure that there is more activity in India, the capital is raised in India, the investors in India, the wealth sharing is done with Indian investors, and a lot of these companies would like to actually have domestic investors, because they will see these domestic investors just not as investors but also as customers, and therefore they would like to be seen very well in the domestic market. And the rules that have been set out by SEBI today are still, I would say, experimental rules. There is no finality about it. I think as we go along, 3 months, 6 months, as more representations come from the industry, as we have hit the ground realities, there would be surely some changes which will be brought about to ensure that we recognize the needs of this sector and we are able to get them to list in India. But as I said in the beginning, I think don't expect flurry of activity, but yes, a step in the right direction, a step which needed to be taken to encourage the Indian technology companies to grow within India and to share their wealth with Indian investors.
Share their wealth with Indian investors. That's really the bottom line, isn't it? Vijay, before we went to Mr. Sinha and to hear what he had to say about these IPO norms, sorry. Okay, I have Vinod Murli with me. Vinod, very quickly, before we went and heard Mr. Sinha, we were essentially discussing the investor base in India and how that is as crucial as easier norms. Do you believe because the government is making a concerted effort and because the market regulator is talking about easier IPO norms, we are going to see better investors flood this community going forward, both domestic and foreign?
Well, I think it won't result in a flood, but there's definitely going to be a better flow of investment. At least there'll be some interest. But like Anupam said earlier, liquidity has been a challenge across even the larger exchanges. So what remains to be seen is how deep does the market get? What are the first few offerings available? What kind of companies opt for this route? Are they really the companies that are ready for listing in the true sense, or are they situations where there's not enough attractive investments possible in the private market? So I think there's a lot of this journey has to be kind of taken through many steps, and this is definitely a step which is sorely needed for the startup ecosystem in India. It's definitely showing that the regulator has their ears to the ground and understands what's happening. But it will be kind of premature to say that there's going to be more investors and a flurry of IPOs anytime soon. But it's definitely going to improve sentiment and at least get an Indian listing into mainstream discussions, because that is not happening till date. So even the few companies that are talking about or targeting a listing immediately talked about an overseas listing because the norms were just not amenable. Today, at least, that will be brought into mainstream discussions. Investors, I'm sure, will start evaluating that as an option. And one should also keep in mind that it's not just an overseas listing that causes companies to flip overseas. There's contract enforcement that comes into play. There's jurisdiction advantages sometimes that, and for global company as a global business, there are advantages to have holding companies outside India. So this is one piece of the puzzle which is being solved at this point of time. To completely ensure that capital flight does not happen or value creation happens within India, I think several arms of policy and government have to come together to kind of make it easier and more efficient for companies to have their headquarters in India and still run a truly global business. And on the other side, kind of look out to an investor base and attract an investor base which is keen to envelop this kind of a startup ecosystem.
Just hold your thoughts there, because I'm going to take this to Mr. S. Ramesh and I'm going to get down to specifics and get each of your views on this. The whole lock-in period, I know Mr. Sinha spoke about a 6-month lock-in period instead of a 3-year that's done for conventional companies and conventional listing, the brick and mortar companies. For startups, it has been reduced to 6 months, whereas the demand was that you wanted that to go away completely. Is that a dampener of sorts, Mr. Ramesh?
No, I really don't think so. See, if you look at the main exchange today, the pre-issue capital other than the promoter capital of 20% is locked in for 1 year. As against that, this is 6 months. And in the final scheme of things, while I will agree that to start with, this is meant to be not the kind of liquidity that you will see in a typical big stock. If you keep that in mind, I really don't think this is such a big issue. The fact that you have a 10 lakh limit is something that investors have to
Manish, you were a part of the entire expert group that really... Fair point indeed. Manish, you were really a part of that expert group that really worked on these new listing norms for startups. There was plenty that you put on the table, some of which SEBI has gone with and some of it has not, and Mr. Sinha actually pointed some of those things out. What are the pain points according to you that still exist? Some of the things that you would have wanted to be further diluted or at least be addressed?
So Supriya, I think the way to look at this is, there are several things that need to get addressed, and coming to specifically the listing norms, it includes the period of lock-in, it includes the quantum or the value of trade that can happen, it includes when it can move to listing, it includes disclosure requirements, including a past track record of profitability and stuff like that. It was a very eye-opening kind of conversation between both the groups, iSpirit representing in the whole startup ecosystem and sharing what the requirements and what the desires are versus the SEBI telling us why they do what they do and why some of those laws have come up. And I think in each area, it's a leap of faith that has been taken, wherein there is a belief that these steps, if taken today, can eventually translate to much larger opportunities or much larger movements. And I would actually not say that there are dampeners. 6 months is a movement from what it was earlier, and if things go right, I'm sure that there is an intention and a desire to reconsider the numbers at a later point in time, and I would consider this as a first step towards that, rather than thinking that this is the conversation and there's no other further change that is going to happen. And I must also share that I heard Mr. Haldia talk about different parts of the bureaucracy come together. Actually, that conversation is happening with all parts. So Mr. Raghuram Rajan was in Bangalore. We had presentations to the Commerce Ministry, to the Finance Ministry, and I would say that it is not just receptivity of them, but it actually a proactiveness from their side to try and understand what needs to be done. And almost all the points that need to be addressed are on the table, and some of them we are able to get movements on. Some of them, for various reasons, are maybe being put on a back burner. But I think if we can demonstrate few companies coming and doing the right things, and if things move in the right direction, all of those areas will eventually converge, and we will see a situation where India will become as attractive, if not more, than anything else. I agree that there is a lot still need to be done, and we should not assume that everything will become good tomorrow and all companies will start listing in India tomorrow. There are various factors which affect it, like we just heard. It will also have jurisdictional issues. It will mean the investor base being there, etc., etc. But once these things start falling in place, I am sure that the momentum will eventually pick up, and things will probably become comparable, if not better.
All right, momentum will pick up and things will become comparable. You're the billion-dollar babies, and which is perhaps why everybody is talking about you guys, from Raghuram Rajan to UK Sinha to Arun Jaitley here in New Delhi. But Anupam, I'm going to bring this to you, and I specifically want to speak to you on the pressure points and the pain points that still remain and all of that. But I first want to address the issues that have been spoken about. QIB discretionary allotment, how much of a shot in the arm is that really? You have the discretion, unlike other IPOs that don't.
Yeah, look, I'm going back to the same issue of saying that, look, just by easing some listing norms, is that a game changer? And I don't believe so. So for me to comment specifically on a particular clause of the listing norm as a potential game changer is sort of not in line with my view that the entire listing norm change is not a game changer at all. I think it's the right signals, there are steps in the right direction, but when I look around, we spoke about the ecosystem sort of falling into place and so on, we still see a lot of pain points when it comes to the income tax and when it comes to RBI and so on and so forth. And while I'm very optimistic as well, like the other panelists here, I do believe that we are running out of time. I do think that it's time that we really sort of while the proactiveness is welcome and it is a shot in the arm because we're sending the right messages, I do think we need to very quickly get a house in order when it comes to sort of building businesses in India, creating value and creating jobs. I've been involved in a couple of transactions recently over the last couple of years, and believe me, foreign companies don't want to acquire companies in India today just because all of the RBI sort of compliance issues that go in. It took almost a year for us to complete one transaction, which should have otherwise not taken more than 2 or 3 months. So, I welcome the SBI easing the listing norms and, minor changes here or there, whether it's 6 months, 3 months or 9 months in terms of lock-in, whether discretionary is 5% or 10%. I don't think that really makes as much as a difference as all of the different parts of the ecosystem pulling together to ensure that companies that are built here stay here, and companies that are built outside also want to come here to build value. So I think that's really what I am hoping will fall in line. Fortunately for us, 3 of these departments that work together all now fall under FinMin. I think putting the Corporate Affairs Ministry under the FinMin was welcome, and I think again a very good step. I think RBI and now the FinMin need to sort of work really closely together to make a lot of the other pieces fall into place, and that's what I'm hoping we can achieve over the next few months.
You know, you're not the only one who wants the Mill Street and the North Block bosses to work closely together, and that's not the only issue they should be working on closely together. But you've raised an important point there, that listing is just one part of the startup story, and I can sense a sense of frustration when it comes to doing business in India, because you spoke about income tax, you spoke about RBI, you spoke about how long it takes to complete a transaction. Mr. Ramesh, I'm going to bring this to you because these are pressure points and these are pain points that still need to be addressed. I get Anupam's frustration, I get his sense of desperation, because I'm sure he's been through this. But I still want to speak to you about the bit that I spoke about, you know, the discretionary allotment, the recategorization of promoters. Does this really make life easy, or have startups that are traditionally done by the new age, the new blood, the new India, so to say, they've priced these things in. I mean, you know, they're okay with promoters changing. Yes, there's now a new norm in place and they can do so legally, but they're fine with doing one startup, encashing, moving on to the next startup. But that's the nature of the DNA.
Yeah. So what's the question?
So my question really is that, I mean, do all these things really add up to how big we are making this out to be?
No, so we should divide this answer into two parts. One part is if you look at giving a listing platform for these startups and some other companies, that has to be in form and substance the right package. I'm going back to the other panelist, Anupam, who talked about some other things falling in place. So if you just keep that argument on, so they are completely of a different, those points are made from a very different perspective. But if you look at the platform that's been created for allowing a platform and investors to come in, whether it's discretionary allotment or tomorrow the norms for promoters to change, I think what is needed is clarity. I think in some of these norms on promoter change and reclassification, this clarity just helps make it easy for subsequent transactions and subsequent deals to happen. So they're pretty important, because if you ask companies which are today on the main board, they have been asking a lot of questions and different examples of what is reclassification, who remains a promoter, who doesn't. And today there are compliances are different if you're a promoter and if you're not. So all of these do put some clarity into the way forward.
Alright, so it does bring about clarity going way forward, because it very categorically says there is a recategorization of promoters. If it's completely professional, you cannot have more than 1% share in the company. A public shareholder cannot have more than 10% with no special rights and all of that. Vinod, I'm going to bring this to you because the discussion has really moved beyond just the IPO listing norms. It has really moved on to the enabling environment of sorts. The IPO norms are in place. The government is doing to unleash the animal of India, so to say, and talk about the entrepreneur instinct here, our dedicated fund and all of that. What else needs to be done? And I'm going to touch upon the ease of doing business here, because that's something that Anupam largely alluded to.
That's a fair point. So the ease of doing business is absolutely critical. It is getting better, is what we are seeing. It's getting better in some pockets of the country. It's not consistently become better across the board. It's important for companies to plan better in terms of what they should shoot for, what their kind of forecasting should be. And as many of the other panelists said, you need all sections of the government to kind of come together, and there's definitely green shoots there. There's definitely progress there. They're hearing stories of companies moving through various life cycle stages faster and cutting through some of the red tape quicker. So I'm definitely optimistic on that front, and but there's still a lot of work to be done. I mean, we are just getting started. And in terms of the listing, it helps planning, right? So not every company might want to do this kind of a listing on a different platform, and so there needs to be more planning. The investors need to come together, sit for the founders, and kind of figure out what the path should be. How long should the companies remain private? What is the right time frame? What should be the position of the company at that point of time? And what is the platform therein to be listed on? So I think it needs a lot more thought and preparation, but we're just getting started, right? So this is just the first of many, many steps. And as somebody else also said, there will be more changes in policy, I'm sure, along the way, which will help improve the situation further. And that's only natural. So this will definitely bring us back to the mainstream conversation between investors, get founders to think about this, whether they want to, effectively flip out or remain in India. And food for thought, and I'm sure it's definitely a very, very strong start, and let's see how it turns out.
That's an important point that you make. Let's see how it turns out, because this is really not the final step or the destination we have reached. This is just the first or the right step in the journey of startups. I'm going to take closing comments from each one of you, and Manisha, I'm going to come to you for that. The IPO norms are in place, and like I said, the government is trying to build the enabling environment around it. In some sense, is there also a realization that new age businesses need new age rules? They cannot be guided and governed by acts that are 50, 80, 100 years old sometimes. And does this increasing realization encourage companies like yourselves?
Oh, certainly, and I can speak both on behalf of iSpirit as well as on behalf of InMobi. I think there is a realization and there is an understanding that there are several things which needs to be done differently. So if I were to take a few examples, a company which is now starting up in India is no more starting up to do business only in India. So how do you make sure that the funds that gets raised, the companies are able to utilize that to become global? Means we as InMobi, we are today trying to compete with the who's who in the world, and in some sense we claim to be in direct competition with the biggest Silicon Valley companies, and for us to be able to compete with them, the funds should be as fungible, as usable across the world, rather than being limited to use in the country. And I think there is already an effort and appreciation to try and see how that can be done, and we have represented that to the RBI. There is a work happening on how we can attract the right investors from outside of India. We have several challenges around how much they can own in the company, what kind of vehicles the money can come in, can there be a convertible, is there a possibility of a transaction where the value of the stocks get determined at a later point in time, which are kind of very normal transactions that happen in the Silicon Valley, for example. The whole thing around how you define a promoter, means the new age startup companies today don't work with an assumption that we have now to raise money and then we will think of how to do business, but most of them have actually already gotten to a stage where the business is there, and now the IPO is trying to kind of bring liquidity to the employee base which largely owns the shares in the company, and to create some liquidity for the investors who have invested in the early stage when the company actually needed the money. There are challenges around the assumptions that the company has to be profitable for a minimum period of few years before you can go public. If you think of the startup community today, most companies actually forget about profitability in the past 3 years. They may not be profitable even on the day when they go public, and all of these inputs are already fed in. There is a whole list of things that we have presented, and I think it starts from the startup community presenting to the bureaucrats. So we actually had UK Sina come to Bangalore, and we made presentations from the companies in terms of what kind of amazing work these companies are doing, which helps them appreciate why they are doing the things they are doing and why it is different from what were the rules created for. And hence I think there is a realization clearly, and which is also helping make some of these changes that are coming up, which can eventually create the conducive environment for these companies to kind of get investments, funding and stuff like that. To give another example, banking norms today don't allow banks to kind of fund companies which are either not profitable or net worth negative. So all of those I think are understood. It has to be different for these set of companies, and I think already the steps has been taken to kind of make that happen.
Fair point indeed. I'm going to take this to Anupam Mittal, because Anupam, for the lack of a better word, I will call this community more dynamic than traditional businesses have been. The startup community is more dynamic, or even impatient, if I may. Have some of the impatience begun to be addressed by policymakers, be it SEBI, RBI or the government?
Yes, while I might sound frustrated, I have to agree that, there are some concrete steps in the right direction, and, I'm very enthused and I'm very optimistic about things changing for the better and the environment becoming more enabling. My only thing, and just a very short, quick comment here is I think we need to do this sooner rather than later. And while the new crop of entrepreneurs may be a tad bit more impatient, I think it's for good reason. I think there are, global sort of spots where, whether you take Singapore or other countries which are creating very, very enabling environments very, very quickly. And I think we are today in a situation as a country where we compete globally. And so we need to move very quickly. And that's really what I'm hoping that we'll be able to do under this government. And the recent steps that we are seeing, the signals that we are seeing are all in the right direction. So I'm pretty enthused and optimistic.
All right, you're enthused and optimistic, and that's always a good note to end the show on. But Mr. Ramesh, very, very quickly, I'm going to ask you for your last closing comments. There are no comparable financial ratios for startups, most of them out there. They're making losses, and yet there is a realization that these are the new age businesses that are going to take India forward. Is my analysis right, and do you concur with me?
I think your analysis is right. These are all very high growth companies. They are disruptive technologies in many cases. They are going to disrupt our lives. And if you look at just a small evidence of the kind of capital that has come in, they should tell you that there is something out there happening which is unprecedented for us in our lives. And therefore, I feel that these companies are very different from the traditional brick and mortar companies that we have known. They need to be evaluated differently, and they probably need to be treated differently as well.
All right, they need to be evaluated and treated differently. I'm completely run out of time here on this special edition. Each one of you, we really appreciate you joining us right here on ET Now, the game changer of sorts as far as startup IPO listings are concerned. We get you the most relevant voices on the channel that brings you news and views that matter. Thanks very much, each one of you, for being with us.